So Aptera has been working very hard getting their vehicle into volume production behind the scenes. They've let everyone know that they're going to clarify and dive into the nitty-gritty details on an update video near the end of this month, but if you kind of want a sneak peek, I'd recommend watching some of the more recent videos uploaded by Aptera Owners Club. He tells you all about the specific motor that they're switching to and why they're switching to it and that kind of thing. So I'm kind of just recapping and going over the basics of the transition as a whole, but in case you weren't aware, essentially Aptera, at least for their launch edition model, is not going to be using a Lafe to supply their powertrain, which is another young, ambitious startup company that was primarily working on developing hub motors, which in theory should be more efficient. The concept is you apply the torque directly to the wheel instead of having a centrally mounted motor with drive shafts that go out to the wheel. There's a little bit more losses involved in that traditional process, but because Lafe is so young and so new, it sounds like they don't have the powertrain that Aptera needs, or at least at the volume that Aptera needs in order to reach volume production. Now, at first glance, some people may look at this as a downside, but in my opinion, this is actually more of a good sign because it means that Aptera is locking down supplier agreements and trying to get this vehicle into volume production, and they're finding their slowest points in realizing, okay, this isn't gonna work. We need to get this vehicle out sooner rather than later, so let's try to rely more on off-the-shelf components whenever we can. And in this particular case, it involves using a drive unit that is very much already been proven and is already on thousands of vehicles driving around today. So on one hand, there may be a little bit of an efficiency hit by switching to this drive unit, but I think Aptera is probably making the right call by saying, let's not delay the vehicle further, let's just start getting it out and onto the market. Plus, as others have said as well, hub motors were kind of uncharted territory, okay? There's not a lot of EVs that have hub motors on the road right now, and while I do think there is promise in the future down the road for them potentially being a more efficient option for different EVs, the Aptera already has so many innovative and groundbreaking changes all at once. The drive unit might be the kind of thing you're better off going a little bit more traditional with. And if you've been following me and my channel for a while, you know that the Aptera's main way of achieving such great efficiency numbers was not through some miraculous cooling technology or some incredibly good drive unit technology. It was mainly stemming down to the aerodynamic shape, and that's the part that shouldn't be changing here. They are still planning on using forged carbon fiber to make an ultra lightweight three-wheeled auto cycle that can still sit two people concealed on the inside, protected from the outside elements. You still have air conditioning, you still have a windshield wiper, so it's not like an Arcimoto or a motorcycle, but still has substantially lower weight than any other EV on the market and a substantially lower drag coefficient. And I think those two things that they're prioritizing for the launch edition is what's going to unlock game-changing range and efficiency that we just do not see anywhere else in the EV market. So, while yes, it's probably a bit of a bummer that maybe the launch editions aren't going to be all-wheel drive anymore, maybe the performance metrics are going to change a little bit, at the end of the day, I don't think most Aptera customers were buying it because they wanted to do a crazy amount of off-roading, or they really wanted a vehicle with all-wheel drive because it's already an auto cycle. So it's a little bit weird and a little bit different compared to anything else on the market today. No, I think the vast majority of people excited for the Aptera are in it for the efficiency and, of course, the solar charging, which is something we don't really see very often on many other vehicles on the road these days, and that's something that's not being compromised on for their launch model. I asked the CEO about that directly, and he reiterated that the solar tech is all done and ready to go, so you should still have passive charging from sunlight, which is awesome, and I still think the drag coefficient being super low, and also the weight of the vehicle being about half that of most other EVs on the market is going to result in way better efficiency than what we see on the market today. And while Aptera has said they're interested long-term in pursuing hub motors and that kind of thing, there was a lot of community concern about unsprung weight. You know, that's part of the drive unit technology that hadn't really been tested before. We're gonna have all three motors on parts of the vehicle that are not protected by suspension. So every pothole, every bump in the road is vibrating each of these motors way, way more than a traditional motor would ever be vibrated. And I'm sure they're testing and experimenting with that kind of thing, but still, again, a lot of new technology with the Aptera. It's their first product. And something as vital and as important as your drive unit is not something you want to get too prototypey with when you're a young up-and-coming startup and this is the first vehicle you're ever going to deliver. So I think it's probably going the safe route out by falling back to a traditional drive unit system that'll just be on board the vehicle. That's the great perk of EVs, is that the motors for them are honestly not that big, so it shouldn't honestly be all that complicated to integrate a centralized drive unit. And also for two, another concern I had that I didn't really see much of the community bring up is the fact that with all the Aptera prototypes I've seen, and also there's a decent chance the production models might have a design somewhat similar, the high voltage wiring was kind of exposed. Like, I know that high voltage wiring can kind of drive up the price of the vehicle, and when you have those motors going to each of those wheels, you have to be routing high voltage wiring out to all three wheels, which now you probably won't have to have as much high voltage wiring in the manufacturing process because the drive unit in the front is going to be very close, basically touching the battery pack, which means having the shortest possible distance for that high voltage wiring to travel. Whereas before, the high voltage wiring was going to have to stretch not only to the charge port in the back, but also down to the rear motor and out to the two front motors, which I could see making the manufacturing process a bit more complicated, a bit more expensive. And Aptera is a young, up-and-coming startup, so I understand why they may want to preserve their profit margins as much as possible. Plus, the EV community is getting a lot more competitive now, with Tesla's lowering in price and all these more competitive lease options that are coming around. So I think personally Aptera can get away with charging quite a bit for their launch edition model, simply because they're a young startup and an exciting new brand, and a lot of people just want to be associated with that in the early days, so people will pay a premium to know that, hey, I'm one of the first people to ever take delivery of an Aptera. That's probably most people on the accelerator list. I don't think there's going to be a lot of people, at least in the first year or two of production, that are necessarily cross-shopping the Aptera with other traditional EVs on the market. You know, if you're buying an Aptera, you want to be part of a new age of electrification. You want something that's a lot more radical, a lot more aerodynamic, a lot cheaper to run, and of course you want solar charging, which is just not really an option on any of the other EVs out there. Plus, the Aptera is going to have CarPlay, which Teslas don't, and a lot more of a repairability emphasis, which also Teslas are not super well known for. So even though it might be close to price parity with a lot of competitive EVs out there, I still think a lot of people are going to prefer having that extra range, that solar charging, the CarPlay, the repairability. Those are the kinds of things that you won't find in a lot of similarly priced EVs. And while it definitely is a bit of a bummer if you were really hoping for your launch edition Aptera to have all-wheel drive, or you were really passionate about that hub motor design, I get the feeling that Aptera was perfectly aware that Elaphe may not be ready in time, so they were designing for a traditional drive unit system in the back end just in case Elaphe wasn't ready, and this is not catching them off guard, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about it at the end of the month with their July update video. But what do you guys think? Is this more concerning to you? Am I just reacting way too positively because I'm a self-proclaimed Aptera fanboy? All that stuff, feel free to let me know what you're thinking down in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos, so thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.